Board on this computer.
There you go.
Okay, all right, we're recording. We've been chatting for a few minutes. I know that we've got about 50 people signed up, but I guess what I'll do first is just introduce myself. My wife, Lori, will try to watch the chat. So my name is Chris Pritchie. My wife is Lori. Most of us know us from our Santa experience. I think that's what we're mostly known for, or some of you know me for arguing on Facebook, but that's okay. I'm trying to get better at that, I promise. First, I also want to thank Baby Dreams and Aileen for, we met her really for the first time at Texas School and shared some ideas that we had. And we really want to grow this education group where there's opportunities for photographers to really learn, and it to be a great resource for them. And it brings a great value to the Baby Dreams customers. So what I would ask you guys to do today is reach out and invite some other photographers, maybe that don't know about Baby Dreams, maybe that don't know about the education group. But Aileen is incredibly progressive, incredibly smart. It just blows me away how good she is with social media. And I see her posting it, seems like 5 a.m. and at midnight. I don't know if the poor girl ever gets any sleep. But she's so good at building an online community and online following. And so I'm just hoping that in some way, Lori and I can provide a little more value than just a typical place, a typical group, that you can actually come here and learn something. And this would not be possible without Aileen allowing us to do this, and her support. I know she's a big proponent of educating. And I'll add, I was, John, you can probably be somewhat similar, I would suspect. I've been in the business for 15 years, and I did not like shooting on backgrounds. I just thought they were cheesy. They were boring. If you got a really good one, it was kind of an old master's background, and it just kind of looked very dated. And when I met Aileen, and we used some of her backdrops during Texas School to shoot on, and then we met, and I told her some of our struggles, and then she showed me some stuff. I was absolutely blown away by the quality of what she produces and the designers that she has. And it seems like every day she's coming out with something new. So our studio is 100% Baby Dreams. We've gotten rid of everything else. And I'm having to learn, just like a lot of you are, I'm having to learn to really shoot on drops, because I've always been location, or I've built my sets. So it's got me really rethinking about how I approach my business with just the incredible options. And then I'll add that I feel like it gives us, those of us that have a studio, it gives us a great advantage over those photographers that don't have a studio, where we can do some really unique things, building sets and things like that. So it's opened my eyes, and I kind of feel like a kid in a candy store. But on the flip side, it's a little scary, because I'm not even sure, I'm having to learn how to hang backdrops. I'm having to learn how to put rooms together. And that's a big challenge for me. So, my thought has always just been to composite something. So it's pretty amazing. Our back to school images this year were so easy. I didn't have to build this big backdrop. I used a few props, put it together, and it looks fantastic. So again, I want to thank Aileen for allowing us to do this and allowing us to help you guys. So let's get into today. I wanted to start off today pretty basic. And so did some research, and what I wanted to do is just kind of give you kind of what I think my basic 10 things are on Photoshop. I'll say this, Cheryl, you've heard me say this before. I'm not going to teach you the right way to do anything. I lie a little bit there. There are a few little things that I say, this is the way it needs to be done. But what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to share with you mostly how I do things. I've had some decent success, but I feel, I struggle with my own confidence with Photoshop. I feel like I'm a baby at it, but then, when I get to teach other students, when they're in here for our workshops, and I see how many people really struggle with Photoshop, I just feel like there needs to be a little bit more basic stuff, basic fundamentals that you need out there. So we're always learning, and there's always 3 or 4 ways to do something. So with that, everybody can share my screen. So let's start with These are kind of 10 things. This lesson is going to last about a half hour. I really want the lesson to last about 15, 20 minutes, and then we can ask questions.
There's
Okay.
anybody that needs him, because I can't. See
I'm not seeing anything. It's popping up for me.
Okay.
So let's look at 10 fundamentals where everyone should start. This is strictly my opinion. The one part is non-destructive editing. I'm going to move that over there. That's really important. We'll talk a little bit about that. Layers. That's kind of an inside joke with Lori and I. I'll say it right now. Nobody send this to Photoshop, but Lori gave me my first hacked copy of Photoshop about 15 years ago, before we were married and we were friends. We were actually next door neighbors. And then I moved away, and I was really struggling when I got Photoshop, and layers was the one thing that just confused me. And so I kept emailing her, and she'd never respond. So I just gave up and started pestering somebody else. So layers, I think, are incredibly important. Adjustment layers, we'll talk about that. Levels specifically, that is an adjustment layer. We'll talk about the spot healing brush, and something else, I guess, that's a little bit of a typo there. Probably the patch tool is what I meant to do there. The histogram, I think that's really important that you have a histogram up there that you can kind of see what's going on. So I'll show you my workspace and how that works. The clone tool, I'll show you how that works. And I'll show you one of the things to be very careful about when you're using the clone tool. Cropping, that's another item that we'll talk about. I do obviously some cropping, but I probably do less cropping than a lot of people. So I'll share a little bit of cropping issues. Brushes are probably the thing that's changed my work dramatically. And I feel like that I'm a teeny tiny newborn baby with brushes. I'm learning so much more. And then we'll talk about sRGB. And I'm not going to come across, like I said, as an expert at anything. I'm just going to tell you how it works for me. This will give you a good place to start, and then you can broaden your horizons from there. So let's talk about non-destructive editing in Photoshop. All right. So I'm going to pull over an image that was a lone image for me. This was an image that was Lori's idea. And what I'll do is I'll come in here, and let's see if I even did it now. This one here was called "What Do You Bring to the Table?" This is an image that was a composite. Let me turn off all of these layers and see if I have. Yeah, so this probably is not a great image. Let me open a different one real quick, because this was a composite. So non-destructive on it probably isn't the, let's see, the best one to look at. Let's see. Bear with me here 1 second while I look for an image. Let's see. Well, I'll just pull up this image here. So this is a food image that I did a few years ago. And when we talk about non-destructive editing, this is images pretty much straight from the camera. I've never entered it in IPC. We'll talk about print competition some other time. But this was kind of a signature food image that I had. It's from a sushi place. But what a lot of people will do when they start editing, let's just hypothetically say, let me find my pen. My pen has disappeared. There's my pen. So if everybody can see my screen well. So usually when you open an image, it'll open up in Photoshop and you'll have this layers tab. And you can see how I have my workspace set up here. And I'm using a Wacom pen, a Wacom tablet, Wacom, however you want to pronounce it, 24-inch touch screen. So you can't, I don't think you can tell, but I'm putting my hand on the screen and I'm drawing right on the screen. Let's just say there's a couple of spots or something that we want to take out. Let's just say, look over here in this glass. Maybe we want to fix, these little stripes here for some reason. They don't bother me, but I'll just use that as an example. It wouldn't be uncommon for someone to come in here and let's just say I'm using the, I want the highlight to show up so you can see it, the spot healing brush. Well, if you notice, my background layer is locked. Now I could come over here using the spot healing brush and I could drag on this and you see how it's kind of starting to take that out, right? If I do it a couple of times, maybe that little spot right there, I want to take that out. That's great. So I've taken that. Maybe this little spot right here is really bright. We'll see if it'll remove it. And it's done a pretty good job of brightening it. But the problem that you see we have now is I've edited on this background layer. And now if I want to undo my changes, I'm kind of stuck. I can't. So when we talk about non-destructive editing, almost what 99% of us do is when we open an image, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my history, and I'm going to move this. I'm going to click back here. I might even show you a little bit of a history, a setting that you'd want to change. So now you see that all of that spot's back, that kind of thing. So what most of us will do is we will duplicate this layer. On a Mac, I simply hit Command J and I've duplicated it. That's one way to do it. I think if I go here, no, that's just a blank layer. I can't remember how to do it down here on the quick panel. But if you just hit Command J, I've now duplicated this layer. You can change this if you want, the title here by double clicking and put in here duplicate. I'll just type duplicate. So now if I want to come in here with my spot healing brush, I can just come in here and take some of this out, right? So I'm using my spot healing brush right there. I'll come in here, I'll do this, and you can see it. Now, when I come up here and I turn this off and on, you can see how it's non-destructive. I can always go back to the beginning. And an example of being able to go back, you can see that's why I have all of these layers here, right? So let's go back over here. So hopefully that makes sense on non-destructive editing. And you can see kind of some things here. So we will use layers to create non-destructive editing, right? So that makes it simple. So if I look back up here, the next thing is layers. So boom, layers. So layers, let's talk about layers. I know most of y'all know layers, but that's okay. Let's learn about layers. So if you look here, I've got all these different layers here. So if I want to go backwards, what you're seeing here, let me turn some stuff on here. What you can see is how I started building this image. This is a composite, and I don't know what version this is. This is version number 6. So you can see as I'm turning things on, I'm turning on different layers. And now I'm adding different elements. And as you move up here, and then if you look within these folders, there are also other layers that are on. So you can group your layers so that you know what they are, right? So if I just keep turning these on, all right, so that was the interior. And if I want to come in here, now I want to expand this. Now you can look here. So this was a big competition image that I had. I don't even know how many hours I had editing this image. But you can see all of the different layers that are inside here. There's clipping mask. There's this is probably a curves layer. That's a levels layer. And that's what that little symbol means. But the key thing with layers is, and I didn't do a good job of it here, I've gotten better at it. If I wanted to go back and edit this image, one of the things that you should do is you should retitle your, every time you create a layer, you should retitle it. You just double click here. So I'm just going to call this one, that's Cheryl, I think you're familiar with how I do this. I'm going to call this my printer levels. So this what I do is I just have this levels layer. Let me delete it here so you can see how I got there. So one of the first ways that you can do it, for me, my adjustment, my levels or my adjustment layers, I always come down here and then I'll go to levels. That's just the way I like mine set up. All right. And you can see that it put it right here at the top. So now I'll call this my print levels. This is what I do to balance out if I think the image is too bright or too dark. So now when I click on this, if y'all can see this here, this is a histogram. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And we've got a lot of data over here on the left that represents the darks. This kind of represents the midtones, and this represents the bright. If you see between this point and this point, there is no data. So what the printers will tell you to do is they're going to want you to drag that over to about right there, right? And you can see how it brightened it up just a little bit. So that's before, that's after. Now, if I wanted to, I could come over here and adjust the midtones, right? So I'm doing that with my levels on an adjustment layer. And this is adjusting the blacks. If I wanted to make the blacks darker, I could do it here. If I wanted to pull out some more mid-range. One of the other ways that I do things, if I want to darken an image, I'll come to this slider and I'll just pull this down a little bit if I want to darken it overall. Kind of starts with the highlights and brings it down, brings the whites down. It's not affecting the blacks as much, but it's taking the whites out. All right. So let me see if that makes sense where we are. Okay. So that's a good example of layers. You can see I can turn off different layers and stack them up. And here's another thing is that you can do. So let's just say I've got this here, and let's just say I've got it too bright. So if I wanted to, the other option I can do on a layer that most people don't know about is as long as I have this layer selected, you see how it's highlighted? I can come up here to the opacity. And if you see, if I just hover over the word opacity, it's got a little hand with a finger with arrows. I can click and I can drag this right or left, and you see how it's changing the opacity of that layer, right? So there's multiple ways you can do that. So that works instead of maybe that's a quick way to adjust something. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of an understanding about layers, and you can see how I have my workspace set up. And if I go to Window Workspace, CFS Mini, that happens to be the workspace that I have, right? And in some other lessons, what we'll do is we will talk about customizing the toolbar over here to make it work better for you. So we'll talk about that maybe in the next one. All right. Any questions on layers? I don't mind stopping for a quick question. Anything that I left out? Somebody? No? Okay. So from layers, let's talk about adjustment layers. So let's pull this back up. We're going to pull this one up here. Look at this one again. All right. I'll leave that there. Hang on, I'm trying to move this Zoom thing out of the way. Okay. So adjustment layers can be many different things. I'll look at them here. Some other people will have them up here, but if I wanted, I showed you levels. What if I wanted to do a black and white? I can click here. And now what it did was it brings the properties up here when you click on it. And so I don't know that most people know this, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but you can change how a black and white image looks by adjusting some of the different color layers, even though it's black and white. As you can see different things that are changing. See how I'm pulling out the yellows? I want to make them brighter. Maybe that flame's a little hot. The reds, maybe I want to intensify that part of it a little bit. So you can just that. A good thing is if you don't have to go solid black and white. Remember what I talked about? So on this adjustment level, I can come up here and I can reduce this opacity. And then I can kind of play with this if I want to desaturate this image a little bit. So that's one way to do it. There are many, many ways to do black and white, right? So let's take a curves layer. I'll show you a good way to do a curves layer with a levels adjustment. So a lot of times I'll do this. I'll do a curves layer and I'll bring it way up here like this. And then I'll title that bright. And now what I'll do is I'll select this layer mask. And we didn't talk much about layer mask. We talked about layers, but this is a layer mask. So the reason it's on top of this, you see here, this is your curves adjustment. This is a layer mask. Right now, it's letting me see everything that I've done here. So as I move this, you can see it. When I come over here to the layer mask, and if I want to fill that with black, I can hit Command I. And now it's hiding what happened here. So when I do this, you can't see it doing anything. It's hiding it. But if I wanted to come in here now with a regular round brush, so I hit the letter B on my brush tool here, and now I've got my brushes over here. I'm just going to select a soft brush, and it's going to be white. And for this example, I'm just going to leave it at 100%. My opacity is over here. My flow is over here. And what you'll see is now, because that mask, it's hiding it. What if I wanted to brighten this drink up a little bit, right? So now I just paint over that and I brightened it up a little bit. So when I turn this layer off and on, you can see how I did that, right? For some of you, this is automatic. I know you'll know this stuff, but it's always good to learn. It's always good to hear how somebody else uses it. Now what I'll do is I might, before I did that though, what I would do, if I hit Command Delete, that removed that where I painted white over there. I'm going to duplicate that layer, Command J. I'm going to type dark. And then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to pull this way down. What I typically do, I'm going to make this mask white. What I typically do when I'm doing this is I'll pull this down where it's just a little bit darker than I would ever make that image. All right. So now I'm going to hide that mask. So now if I want to make something dark, let's just say for whatever reason, I feel like the plate is too bright. Well, now I can come in here with my brush and I can paint in here, right? And I can skip over those. And now what I've done is I've come in here, and it's kind of a dodge and burn. That's one, someone might call it that way. So if I turn that off and on, you can see how I darken just that little area there. And if I wanted to, I could reduce that opacity. Okay, well, now the plate doesn't stand out quite as much. And then I can come back to my bright and paint with my white brush. And let's just say I wanted to make this fish stand out a little bit here, right? And I can adjust my opacity of my brush. I'll bring that down to say 20%. So now I'm just kind of coming in here and making that a little bit brighter right in here. And let's see if I want to make the ketchup darker. I'll come over here and I'll make the ketchup a little bit darker through here. Give the image a little bit more contrast. Right? Maybe I'll want this a little bit darker, maybe a little bit in here. All right. So the other thing that I would do, because we were talking about layers, I might select both of these. So I'll select the first one, then I'll select the second one by holding the shift key down. And if I hit Command G, I'll group those, and I typically call that bright dark. Now you can see I can turn that off and on and see what I did. So you can see how I changed with just some simple, basically, this is a way to dodge and burn that I've changed the look of that image. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? In another episode, we will talk about actions where I can write an action, and I've got one that's written that I could write that action, and it would put that in, it would create those layers for me. Any questions on that before I go off adjustment layers? But there's all kinds of adjustment layers here. There's photo filter. I use this a lot. So if I feel like this image is too cool, then I can bring this up. See how I'm making this image a lot warmer. I don't know if you can tell that. Mostly you can tell where those blues have gotten a little softer. And then I'll share a little secret that most people, I think all my students know it. I have one aspect of photography I really struggle with. I'm colorblind. And so I have a hard time with a lot of things in Photoshop. That's why I've got my wonderful wife working here. I've got an art director that works for me that lays out my albums and things like that. And she's a color expert. So if something doesn't feel right, I usually know. So I send it to a new set of eyes and I get them to take a look at it. So there's other ways we can color correct things. But I usually can get a good feel. So there's a photo filter. That's a levels adjustment or adjustment layer, color lookup. There's all kinds of different things that we can do here, from a gradient, solid color. So if I wanted to give this image, sometimes I'll do this. If I want to create, I do this a lot. So if I want to help disguise any weird colors that I might have going on, I may do a solid color layer like this. Then I'll change the blend mode to color, right? And you see what I've done there? So now I can bring the opacity of this down and I can kind of create a color cast on that image. I do that with my Santa images. I do that with a lot of my competition images, right? So those are adjustment layers. And remember, I'm gonna group all these together. I'm gonna hit Command G just so you can see. It's all non-destructive. I can easily delete what we've done here or come back later and adjust it and start over. I know I had some students that weren't doing things like this and they would flatten as they go. It's rare that I flatten. I'm not a big flattener. Neither is Richard Sturdivant, who taught me. He uses more layers than I do. But like Shannon Tays, she flattens a lot. Let me think of someone. I'll think of her name in a minute. I'm terrible with remembering names. Y'all that know me know that. Sandra Pierce. I love her editing style. I love the way she teaches, but boy, she has very few layers. I mean, it's a kind of a running joke between her and Richard. Okay, so let's see. The benefits of adjustment layers is it gives you control. You can stack adjustment layers, and then you can obviously re-edit it at any time. Okay, next one. Instant and automatic fixes. Let's see. There are always things in here. Now, I don't ever use this. So, well, a good way is the automatic would be here. Let me see. Let me go to, let's see. I'm trying to think of a good one for, let me go to, hey, let me do this. Let me just delete this. So if I'm going to duplicate that layer. If I go to window or filter, camera raw filter, this is a great one. I think there's an automatic in here. No, I didn't want to learn more right now. Okay. And there is an auto button here. A lot of these layers will have an auto that you can hit. I never use auto. It doesn't hurt to test it to see what it does. But if I hit auto, I can always come back in here and adjust these sliders here. We'll talk about using camera raw in your images in a different episode. I use a lot of the camera raw in Photoshop. That's kind of a new trend. It wasn't that powerful a few years ago, but it's become very, very powerful. But that's a good example of using the auto to do something. So if I wanted to click OK, and I go, oh, I really like mine better. Well, I can just bring this down, right? I can bring it down and play with it. But you can see how that kind of balanced out the image. So, right? All right.
Chris, isn't auto
that's one of-
utilizing some of the AI that is being incorporated into Adobe's programs?
You know, I've the AI is such a controversial subject that I've not even played with it. Really, since it came out really in its popularity in the last 4 to 6 weeks, I have been swamped with teaching 2 workshops. We went to Kentucky for a little vacation. We really went there for work, and then we stayed a couple extra days. Then we came back, and then this whole last week we were in Kentucky again, taking a close friend on a bucket list trip for him. He's got terminal brain cancer, and so the AI has been out, and in some of the small circles I run in, it has been very, very controversial, and I have mixed feelings on it. So I don't know exactly how it works because I've never tried it. I do know that there are some people mixing their images with AI, and I think it's great. I think it's a great tool. But as far as the auto part of it, I'm not really sure. But I do know that if you wanted to match colors, there's some auto ways you can do that. If you shot someone and you wanted to make them feel like they were part of the scene, where you could match colors. And I don't know if that's what you meant, John.
No, I think that's, I know exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about as far as using AI artistry to create images and then composite them together.
Right.
And that's a little different where I'm talking in an editing space or in post where they are teaching computers how to edit based upon, I guess, formulas or presets, if
Right.
you will. And that's more in the reference of where I was going with the use of utilizing auto within Lightroom or Photoshop or
Right.
some of the other programs that are out there in that
And
respect. But
John, and I've not studied it. It's one of the things on my list to do, like neuro filters and some things like that.
right.
I know those are something that's really interesting that I've not dove into at this point yet. So that might be a good subject to have someone that bring on that I can cheat and learn from them when they're teaching all of us.
Yeah,
But
there's
I know like the Liquify tool does a good job with some AI where it finds the eyes and such.
Yes.
And we can get into Liquify on a different day, but it does a really good job of discovering where the eyes are and finding them, where you can edit them. But I'd be curious to see, I'm kind of curious to see where the AI goes in the auto world, where, hey, fix the blemishes, brighten the eyes, do all those things that everybody wants. That is going to be interesting. And so have you seen one work?
As for editing purposes,
Yes.
I know there's a number of companies out there, and some of them are they can get to be really expensive, particularly if you're a wedding photographer and you're trying to deliver a gallery of 5 to 1,000 images.
Right.
Some of these automatic editing programs, because you got to admit it, shooting a wedding is fun, and getting the angles and the images and stuff. That's the joy of photography. The pain side is like, oh my God, now I got to edit all these to create a look or a feel
Right.
based upon what I've promised this client. And there are AI programs that will say, hey, you give us an idea of what your editing style is, and we'll go through and edit your 1,000 images, but we're going to charge you a nickel, 8 cents, 10 cents a piece. Well, that gets expensive really fast
Sure.
on the back end for editing purposes, but at least you're not stuck behind a computer
Well,
for.
then it comes down to just how much is your time worth comparing just to outsource it. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
No,
And they
I'm
recognize
anxious
that.
to see where things go. I do believe though, that AI is never going to replace a guy holding a camera, and it's never
No.
going to hold an artist behind a computer. But I do think it's going to cause those of us that do more creative work to elevate what we do and learn and stay ahead. Just like I'm still learning, I'm still trying to get better. Compared the work that I do, the work that I did that was easy merits 3 or 4 years ago probably wouldn't merit today. An image that I created 2 or 3 years ago that would be a potential loan image may not even merit today. If you go back and look at a lot of the images from 10 years ago that were loan images, I'm not sure a lot of them would merit. So we have to keep getting better. And I think an individual that's determined and with some skill is always going to be able to outperform creatively anything AI can do most of the time, not always. There is some
Right.
pretty powerful stuff out there.
Yeah, I see it as another tool in the toolbox, just as your
Absolutely.
camera is a tool and your, Photoshop is a tool. If
Yep.
you need something that you need to bring a vision to life, AI is there. But I feel like we kind of digress. That's the
Yeah, that's
beauty
okay.
of Baby Dream backdrops is they take care of a lot of that background stuff for you.
No, they do. And I know that there are some designers out there that are blending some of their AI stuff with stuff that you can order backgrounds from. And I think it's cool. I think it's awesome. I think there's a wonderful place for that technology in our industry and creating unique images for our clients. So I'm not against it in every realm. There are areas where I don't agree with it in competition and things like that. But as far as just creating work for your clients, use whatever tool you've got. I mean, we're here to make a living and make money. So use
Yeah.
whatever you can use. So that's my thought on that. Okay. So
Thanks.
let's see. And the reason we had that little off discussion, because we'd already talked about levels. That was my number 4 thing. So we've had a good discussion about levels. I think y'all understand how that works. And I did show that. I'll just pull it back up just so we can see real quick. So if I take this image, for example, I'm going to go back to my starting ground on this image. I can go to my history. I can always go all the way back right here. Boom, that's where I started. So now if I go to my adjustment layers and I have a levels, here you can see it's pretty good. There's probably a little bit of some area that's blown out. That's why you see that data going all the way over here. But if I wanted to adjust the midtones, I can do it here. If I want to adjust the blacks, if I wanted to bring the whites up here, that's great, I can. This one's probably a better example of how the levels layer helps. So this image was here, really, really dark image. I don't know how it looks on your screen, but I've got this adjustment layer here. So I think let me start it over. Let me just delete this here. Come on, let's delete this levels adjustment layer. And I add it here, go back to levels. Now you can see there really what you want is you want all your data between this point and this point. Most of the time, there can be exceptions. So if I pull that over there, that should have gotten brighter. See, it did get a little bit brighter, not a ton. So I felt like that's still a little bit dark. Right. If I grab this and I pull here, now I'm going to have details that are blown out, that there's no detail in there, and we don't want that. So if I wanted to make this image a little bit brighter, I would probably grab the mids and bring them up here. And that's just doing it with levels. All right. So let's go back over to my slideshow. And so what levels and curves will do in the adjustment layers, they'll just make your image pop. That's the big difference. If an image looks a little flat, you can do it with levels. So another adjustment layer that you can do that gives you a little bit more control. It takes a little more skill and stuff to learn, but you can do a curves layer. You saw me using that one. The cool thing on the curves layer, you can pull up the bright parts here. Maybe you want to pull something down here. You want to bring a little more detail in the blacks. I can do this here. So you can see it for a lot of people, it gives you a little more control over what you do here. And then if you wanted to, you could come in here and there's obviously presets. So I could do that one. I could try a lighter one. So there's all these presets that have custom curves adjustments, or you can drag it and do your own. You can slide it over here, slide this over here. All right, so that's curves. I use curves. I'm not a curves expert. Some would argue I'm not really an expert at much, but I just kind of know how to use. I know how to use a lot of the tools. I wouldn't call myself an expert at very many of them, but I know enough to get by. All right, so where did my presentation go? Where did that go, Lori? Why did I lose my presentation? I know it disappeared. Yeah, bear with me here, folks. It's not there. There we go. Okay.
And I don't think that
What's that?
when you made that thing in the beginning, it's got the list, that wasn't consistent with what you did throughout. the rest
Okay,
of it, so they're not
we
gonna
can
match.
adjust that. Okay, the spot healing brush. That's one that I've really gotten into a lot. Let me find an image and pull up something. Let's see. Let me see what this image is. I had someone ask about hair that they wanted to learn how to hair. The spot healing brush can be really good with that. And I need to learn more on the spot healing brush. So we'll see how big this file is. I don't even know which one's opening up. Okay, this is a good one to look at. So I'm just going to go back to 0. So here's, we talked about non-destructive editing. So boom, I'm going to take this back to, this is an image that we shot a while back. So you can see the differences, kind of a painted look. So if I go here and let's kind of zoom in and look at her hair. And her hair actually looks pretty good here. It doesn't see, some of the areas don't look too bad, but if I wanted to, one of the things in doing touch-ups, spot healing brush, you'll see that sometimes you'll get hairs that kind of go, if the hair is flowing this way, I don't know if you can see my screen, this hair is flowing this way. Yeah, here's a few spots right here, right? We want the hair going this way. We don't like a lot of hairs that are coming over in here. So I can take and just paint over that, and you see how it's removing that hair that's flowing in the wrong way. Sometimes you got to hit it a couple of times. Probably need to get with Shannon and figure out how to get better at the spot healing. You've kind of got one going here, right? It's going here. Let me just make sure I'm staying on task. Yeah. So the spot healing brush is really good. I really like it touching up these little hairs. It's just so fast. If you've got a kid with acne, now that's a birthmark. I know Chandler real well, but let's just pretend this is acne. I can come in here and do this. I used to use the clone tool a lot, but if this was acne and I'm clearing up, you see how fast this is. This works really, really well on the spot healing brush. And I think we talked about the patch tool. If I wanted to fix this area here, I could do that. I could drag that over, and you see kind of how that's how the patch tool works. You circle an area and drag it. And what's good about that is it's generally helping with the texture, but you see here that it's got some texture issues going on. So the way I did it. So that's why I don't like using that as much. So I can go back to my history brush or my history tab. I can bring this back, and now I've just undone all that. So since we're here, here's a setting that I think most of y'all should look at. If you go to Photoshop preferences here, and we go to, I think I can remember where it is. Is it file handling? It is not file handling. Performance. Here it is in performance. So y'all should check here your history states. I have mine set at 469. It's just a random number. I just did this because once you learn to start painting in Photoshop, you're going to want to have a whole lot of history states. I probably need to ask Richard or Shannon or someone else about the cache levels and the cache size. Yeah, so it says set cache levels to 2 or higher for optimal GPU performance. So that's just kind of where my settings are. Like I said, I don't pay much attention to that, except this right here. Because if you're painting an image, let's just say I wanted to paint this real fast. I'll show you why that history state works. I'm going to go to my mixer brush, and I've got one of my Richard Sturdivant brushes, and I'm going to hit sample all layers. So if I'm coming in here and I'm wanting to paint her skin or paint her hair, I'll just paint some hair here. So if I'm coming in here and I'm painting, right? And I go along here, it's not going to be uncommon when you do this. See, we're painting, right? We're painting in here. And this is not the brush I would be painting with. It just happens to be one that I had. so my purpose for showing you this is, okay, so now what I've done is I've sampled all layers, so it pulled those colors up here. You can see where I turned it off. Well, if you go here, you can look and you can see where it's got, every time I lift and tap that brush, it shows that history. So I can go 470 times that I can go backwards if I need to. So if I had messed up somewhere, and I can tell you one of the things that's not uncommon happen, it's any of you that are painters in Photoshop know this, you know, you're sitting here and all of a sudden you didn't realize it, but you started painting on here and you get going and then you say, okay, well, I want to adjust my painted layer, and you go, oh no, and you look and you're on the wrong layer. Well, that's the good thing, is I can just come back here, I can go to my history and I can come back here. And now I went backwards and I'm back here. So now, as you can see, it's not painted on over here. So I hope that makes sense. That might be the one nugget that y'all pull from here that talks about painting. So anyway, but there's your spot healing brush. It works. My favorite place to use it is on hair. When you've got some of these what I call these sideways hairs, like right here, just come in here and start messing with these, try to get them going the same way. You can touch up these, as I call it, these sideways hairs really, really quick. Right? See if there's any more that are coming down here. Sometimes it works really well. There's a hair going through her right there. You see, that did a pretty good job of removing that, right? There's a little bit of a hair right there. You know, is there anything else on the skin? These work really, really good for skin touch-ups. If that was let's just say that was not a birthmark and I wanted to take that out. You see how quick that takes that out. So the spot healing brush is a great tool for that. Okay, let's go back to my presentation. Okay, spot healing brush removes things very easily. It removes unwanted objects. So these are the different ways that you can remove objects. So let me just talk about the clone tool for a second. A lot of us use the clone tool. The way the clone tool works is you pick it up, you've got your opacity and flow here. But when you go to use this, so let's just say I'm touching up her skin, and a kid's skin hardly ever needs touching up. If I should have pulled up a senior boy that had a lot of acne. I've got some that I need to work on. But what you do is you hold the Alt button down and you select an area next to it. And now I can just kind of come in and paint here. If I wanted to, if I'm trying to remove these, let's just pretend that's acne. If I want to remove that, I might come over here and I might change my blend mode or my mode to lighten. And now as I come over here, I can paint anywhere and it's not going to affect the areas that match the lightness. So I'm not changing the overall, right? Okay. But now what you can see, if you look close, this is why I don't like using the clone tool as much, because you see these patterns, these repeating patterns that come along in here. Judges really look for those in print competition. And I'll do a whole episode on print competition because print competition is just a great standard for you to test your work and turn your skills. If you're not doing print competition, join PPA, get into your local guild. You need to be doing print competition. It's raised my level more in the last 3 years than anything else I did in the previous 10 or 12 years. It has changed my skill set. But that's what I don't like about the clone stamp. Well, here's the good thing. I can come back here to my history and let's say, ooh, I don't want to use the clone stamp. That looked ugly. Good. I'm gonna go back over to the spot healing brush. And now I'm gonna come in here and take out, if that was acne, we would take it out. I like Shannon's approach to something. She says when she does skin touch up, she only removes something that's going to be gone in 2 weeks anyway. That's a real, I love that quote that she said. It was really, really awesome. Okay. Any questions about spot healing brush or the patch tool, that kind of thing? Here, let me say this too. I'll show you one of the other things you can do is, don't forget, some people forget about this. If I go to the clone tool, I go to brushes and I'm just going to come down here and pick let's see if it'll do it with this one. I don't know which brush I'm using. I'm going to take this blend mode back to normal at 100%. Yeah, I'll just do it for the purpose of showing you guys. You don't always have to use a soft round brush. So if I want to come over here and I want to select this area over here, and you see this brush here, this is a scatter clone brush. Can y'all see what it's doing? Out here, I'll do it on her skin. So if I take this, so I can clone in the shape of whatever brush I'm using. So let's just say I'll select this rough oil brush Nope, that won't work because that is a mixer brush preference. This rough blender here, I'll go to clone and I'll pick this here. Yeah. So now it's got that shape. So now I can clone this different shape. So whatever brush I have, right, using the clone tool, I don't have to use a soft round. I can use whatever shape I want to use. That's so don't forget about that. You don't always have to use a soft round brush when you're cloning or something along those lines. Okay. And let's go to history. I don't want to mess up this. And here's the cool thing. If I want to go back here, boom, I can go back to there. And now that's the image that I originally had started with. So I did all that editing and I didn't mess anything up. And I don't want to save it. Okay. Let's go back to preview. Okay. All right. Let's see what's next. Black and white. I showed you all that if you remember. That's real simple. Pull this over here. I want to make this image black and white. And I'm just giving you a simple way to do it. I'm going to go to layers. I'm going to go to my adjustment layer, black and white, boom, I've got a black and white image. You can adjust all these sliders however you want, right? But now it's black and white. You can turn it off and turn it on. That's a really simple way to do a black and white image. And I do it sometimes. Clients, most of your clients aren't going to notice if you're doing a landscape image, you're in competition, that's probably not the best way to do a black and white image. But there's many, many different ways, but that's obviously a very simple one. If you want to do an old school 80s image, you can make that mask black. You can come in with a black, I'm going to go with a soft round brush, right? Oh. And then now I'm going to come back in here. Hang on, Command I. Oh, now I hit my quick mask function. I don't know if I can I'm going to do this. I'm going to get out of that. Let's see. Let's see if this will reset it. I can't remember how I get rid of that where it shows it. Okay. All right. So now if I wanted to come in and y'all all remember how to do this, but that's the simple way. There'll be some people on here that watch this that will, if I wanted to make her put it at 100%, if I wanted to make her black and white and everything else in color, this isn't the best image to do it on. I'm just doing this real quick. But maybe we wanted to make them black and white and the rest of the scene color. That's like the first thing that anybody ever did when they first got Photoshop. That's the simplest way to do that. Now they're black and white, their color. You're just using a layers mask. Okay. And let's go back to the history so I don't accidentally save that. And we'll open that back up. Okay. And we'll pull this over. All right. And what's next? There's some experiment with the presets, play around with the sliders, try out the tint option on all your adjustment layers. Those work real well. Cropping. All right. So let's talk about cropping a little bit. And I'm not going to go into photo frame. That's okay. I was going to go into photo frame, but for time purposes, I'm not going to do that. But let's talk about cropping for a minute. So let's see here. So your crop tool, one of the things that if I'm working on a group of images, and I want them all to stay the same exact size for a reason, I'll come up here and I'll select front image. Now I'll double click this. And you'll see up here, it put the sizes in here. So now if I want to come over here and I wanted to crop this image, and let's just say I wanted to crop that image. These fonts are missing. Okay, that's all right. We're not going to save that anyway, but now I'm cropping this. And what you'll notice is now this image is the exact same size because I selected. Sorry, I probably should have flattened this image first because that's a huge file that it's messing with. Okay, but as you can see now, from a size standpoint up here, it matches this one here. There can be a lot of reasons why you want an image the same size. When I'm laying out albums, if I need to crop an image after I've edited them, I'll do that a lot. I'll use this front image a lot, and then I'll go over to the next image and I'll crop it to be the same, because we use InDesign to lay out our albums. And sometimes we will have a template kind of laid out, or we will have used the original image before we edited. And then when I straighten an image, so here's a good reason why in the crop. Let's just say I need to straighten. I can bring my handle over here. You see how it turns to a circle? Boom, I'll do this. So when you straighten this image, you're actually losing part of the image, right? Here, but if you notice, it stayed the same size. So I think that term is interpolate. Who knows? I'm from Texas. I'll say it wrong. But now that image has stayed the same size. It's got the same amount of pixels that it had before. So yeah, it kind of re-rendered, it kind of replaced pixels. So they say, but now my image has stayed the same size, same resolution. There are many other sizes that you can use over here. You can choose, if you want to do a square, boom, you can pick square. You can do 5x7, right? And if you want to rotate, if you want to say, oh, I didn't want it vertical, I want it horizontal, just come up here, click that arrow, and now it'll be horizontal, right? You can straighten the image. I don't use that function, but you can use this to draw a line. So if I draw a line here and say I want it that straight, see how it straightened it. That's a fun tool. I usually do that in Lightroom. We go back to history, open it back up. But let's just say this image was crooked, then I can hit crop, I can hit straighten. And let's just say I have a horizontal line back here. Whoop, hang on. Straighten. Now I can draw that right over the top of that horizontal line and it'll straighten that image. That's a really quick way to straighten an image. A lot of people aren't aware that it does that. So those are your different options in here. You can even save a preset. So if you're having to build a montage for clients and you know that you need 2 images that are going to be cropped to, for whatever reason, you're doing a custom size, a 16.5 by 20.5. You can, so this one's going to save it. But if I wanted to put in a custom size here, if I wanted to go 16.5 inches by 12.5 inches, right? So that's what that is. Okay, so because let's just say for some reason I needed to do that. Well, now I can come up here and I can go to new crop preset and I could type that in there. And now I've got me a new crop preset. So that if I need to come back and crop several images for a client, I've got it there. Okay. Any other questions on cropping while I'm in here? There's all different kind of ratios. I'll tell you this, I do not crop images to send them to the lab. I take the full image straight out of the camera and I drop it into rows. And if I need to order a 5x7, I drop it into the 5x7 panel. If I'm ordering an 8x10, I take that image, the full res image, I drop it into rows and I drop it into the 8x10 slot. And then I move it around so it looks right. And then I order the 8x10. I know that I think a lot of, Lori, what's that software the selling software that I can't ever remember the name? ProSelect. I know that a lot of people will crop images in ProSelect. If a client's ordering a 5x7, they'll crop it. They'll have it in a folder. Then they'll have a 4x6 version of that image in a folder, an 8x10. We don't do it that way here. We never have. I just take the original size file and I order through rows and you don't have to worry about it. Saves us time. All right, we're gonna skip photo frame. Frames basically are really used in print competition. I'll just show you what I would suggest if you're looking for frames for print competition. Let me see where I've got. I don't even know if I could find any real fast. Yeah, here we go. So I've got some, I call them mats, not really photo frames. But what I would do is just find someone who makes these and just buy them. So for example, here's one here. Then I'm going to go to image, rotate. Let me see, where's my adjustments? Where's my rotate? Right here, 90 degrees clockwise. And so now if I wanted to drag this image in there, because I'm getting it ready for print competition or something, I would drop it into here. I put it on that back layer. Now I can grab this corner, size it however I want. And now I've got that image in a frame, right? So there's just kind of photo frames. And if you don't like this, don't forget, well, what do I do now? I don't like that color, or it's too bright. I want to darken it. I can come up here. So here's a cool little thing, a little bonus I'll throw you. I'll do a curves layer on top of that, right? You said I could darken stuff with curves. Okay, great. Now I'm going to darken it. Oh, crud, it's darkening the whole image. I don't want to darken the whole image. Well, if you put on what's called a clipping mask right here, so I have a shortcut that I do it, but I'm going to go create clipping mask. You'll see a little arrow that points down here. Now that means that this adjustment is only going to apply to the layer underneath it. So you see how it did that? So it darkened that matte. That's a really simple way to do it. If I wanted to do the same thing here, I could do this. I could take this layer, Command C, select this layer, Command V. Well, why didn't you copy? Command C. It's not liking me to copy that. Let me see. It usually works. Well, it's not working today. It's probably because it's got the clipping mask on it is why it's not copying. But if I wanted to do that here, let's just say I wanted to brighten that one. I'm gonna bring that up. Oh, but it's brightening the whole image. Just do a clipping mask. So the shortcut is Option Command G. That's what I hit there. And now you can see how I brightened it. I wouldn't suggest making your competition image look like that. If you wanted to do, there's all kinds of other options. If I wanted to do a selective color and I wanted to make that a black, I can do that. And now I can do a clipping mask. Now it's only applied it to that layer. And if I want to change that to color, then I at least maintain some of that texture. That makes sense to you guys? Okay, so that's real quickly how that hits a little bit on frames. Adds a finishing touch to your images. The last thing let's just talk about is real simple. And I'm going to do the short version of it because we're about 12 o'clock. I wanted this to go a half hour. Next time I'll do 5 things instead of 10. It's really simple. For me, I use raw files, JPEGs, and PSDs. I don't do DNGs. I don't do TIFF files. I'm not saying I can't, I just don't. But I've noticed that I had several students in the last few weeks that really don't even use PSD files. Why do you want a PSD file? Well, if I'm working on this image, for example, I'm going to go back and let's take it back to the beginning. It's really simple. Basically, your PSD file, that's a Photoshop file. It saves all of these layers. So if I save this as a JPEG, it flattens all of these, what we call flatten. It merges them all together. If I save it as a PSD file, yes, it's a huge file. It's a great, great big file. I don't even know how big this one is. This one's probably 3/4 of a gig or more, and probably more than that. But it's a really big file. But then I've got all of these adjustment layers and all of these other layers that I've came back that I use that I can adjust later. One of the tricks that I was taught by Sandra Pierce was instead of what I do now on competition images is when I work on it first, I'll save it as, I don't know why I called this baggage test. I was doing something. I hadn't named the title image, the image of this yet for the final competition. So once I start it, then I'll save it as, let's call it baggage 1. And then the next day I come in and I work on it for an hour. I need to go do something else. Then I'll save that version as baggage 2. Then the next day I'll come back, and if I'm working on it later that afternoon, I do some changes. I'll save that as baggage 3. And the reason that I do that is I may look at that image, come back in a few hours later, oh, I really don't like what I did there. It might be too hard to figure out the changes that I made over here and undo them all because my history is gone. Don't forget that. Your history is gone once you close that image and open it back up. You can't undo something. It's only while that file is active. So that's why I save it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's not uncommon for me to have 20 or 22 versions of an image before I get to the final one. So that's why you save it as a PSD file. A JPEG flattens the image. They say that if you open and close a JPEG, that it will lose a little bit of its quality. I don't know that it does enough to worry about it, but that's just what a lot of people say. When you're using a PSD file, you're not going to have that trouble. The last thing I'll say is most of your labs want images in an sRGB format. So if I go over here to edit, assign profile, this one is probably going to be, see, it says don't color, but I want that to be working. Some people work in ProPhoto. I typically work in sRGB. Sometimes I don't pay much attention to it. Remember, I'm colorblind. So that just doesn't bother me as much as it might do some others. Some of y'all may be real particular, but I do know the labs. It's rare that a lab doesn't want an image in sRGB. sRGB was mostly used for web colors, but if you look at most of the labs and you talk to them, they do want it in an sRGB format, unless some of y'all know a lab that actually doesn't want it that way. Okay, well, I went a little longer than I'd hoped. Let's see. So now I'll just open it up for questions. Let me close all of this stuff down. There we go. Okay. So does anybody have any questions over anything I went over? I know some of it was quick. Those are some of the basic things. The good thing about this is you can go back and listen to this recording later or something like that. When I post it in the group, if you've got any comments you want to add, something that you like to use that tool differently, feel free to comment on that. Let's just all be respectful of how each of us does our thing, because We learn from each other. I learned when I teach my workshops, it's amazing how much I learn from the other photographers that are with me. Any questions? John, surely you've got a question.
No, I wanted to say thank you for both of y'all for taking your time on a busy Monday
Yeah,
to present this, and it's I find it helpful. I did pick up a few pearls in there, as
cool.
we all do when we're learning from each other.
Yep,
But thank you for doing this.
Sometimes I will see a tutorial that I go, I know how to dodge a burn, or I know how to do that. I don't really need it. And sometimes on a Saturday morning, I'll sit in the TV, and while I'm watching TV and I'm looking through my phone on YouTube, just bored, and I'll see something, I go, I'll just watch it for a second. Sometimes I want to watch something just to verify, hey, am I doing it the most efficient way? Is there a more efficient way to do what I'm doing? Maybe I've done it this way for a long time, but then I'll watch, okay, well, how does that person dodge and burn? How does this person dodge and burn? So there's so many different ways to do something that I've caught myself really dramatically changing the way I edit based on watching a tutorial that I thought I wouldn't learn anything from. And like you said, I pick up one little small nugget.
Absolutely, I agree.
Anybody else have
Thank
a
you.
question?
No, I say thank you as well, because I pick up something new. It seems like every single time I watch you too. So thank you very much.
Right. I saw Linda had a deal. She said, if you have a power line going through trees, what is the best tool to remove it, especially on the skyline? I would try, the first thing I would do is try the spot healing brush. The clone tool, I used to be clone tool. But what I found is it helps to know your spot brush, know your clone healing tool, know your patch tool. Just play with different ones and to see which one works better for you. So I don't think Linda is still on. It looks like she's not. But that's the other thing that I probably should have mentioned is when one tool is not working, switch to another one. And sometimes I'll use the clone tool to fix something, and then I'll go in with the spot healing brush to fix what this clone tool made better, but not good enough. So using multiple tools to fix the same thing can be a big help. Okay. There's no other questions. Is there anything that you guys would really like to see, or any person that you would love to see me try to get on here? Because I'm going to try to do this twice a month. And I'm hoping, keep your fingers crossed, I'm hoping that we get an additional sponsor to come on board. We're meeting with them Wednesday or Thursday. That will open up even more opportunities to have some other people and things like that on here. So anything specific that y'all want to learn in Photoshop? No one?
I would probably stay focused with the basics and the foundations. I
Right.
mean, there's just so much within the tool itself.
Yes.
And you might want to highlight maybe the differences in why would you use Photoshop versus Lightroom.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the guests that I'm going to have on is, to me, he's one of the Photoshop gurus, Guy Phillips. Guy Phillips and I go back 20 years with a friendship, and he actually came into our business several years ago, and I didn't have time during Santa season, and we knew our process was broken. We were trying to fix it, and Lightroom was doing something new. And I thought I knew how it works, but I didn't have time to look at it. So I hired Guy Phillips to come in, and he sat down and he analyzed all of our processes. He walked around with me for a day, and then he went back and I knew he didn't know everything about that aspect of what we were wanting to do with Lightroom, but he researched it, he studied it, and he came back a week later and presented how he felt we should be using Lightroom to better make ourselves more efficient. And it was very, very productive. So Guy is fantastic with Lightroom. So I'll make an effort to get Guy on here, because I want to learn from him secretly, because I know he's a lot more up to date with Lightroom than I am. I've got it. I use it the way I use it, but I always would like to learn some new tricks.
So I guess my top of mind question, when you go to edit, what's the first thing you open? Lightroom or Photoshop?
Lightroom, always like, because I shoot it raw.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm needing to get it from a raw to a file that I can use. Yes, always Lightroom. I use Lightroom to manage my folders and their locations as much as I do to edit with as well. Yeah.
I'm the same way. I have my own different editing and placement and copying
Yeah.
process
Yeah.
outside of Lightroom, but in terms of getting it to a rough edit to where I can create a gallery for a client, that's the first place I go. And then if I need to polish finals,
Yes.
I'll jump to Photoshop.
Correct. I do. There's a lot of stuff that I do that never gets brought into Photoshop.
Right.
Yeah. And Lightroom's getting better and better at that.
It is.
I can't think of her name. I'll think of her name next time. You can go to her website, sharppixel.com. She's a brilliant retouching instructor. And the way she uses Lightroom is just amazing. And after Santa season, I'm going to sit down with one of her courses and use learn some of her techniques on skin retouching and things like that straight in Lightroom instead of me always bringing it into Photoshop.
Cool.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording.